All right, welcome to Tropical Weather. We've already been looking into this a little bit kind of unofficially because we have been monitoring what's been going on in the Atlantic by looking at the National Hurricane Center's website. But now we're going to get into it and give you guys some general information so that you better understand what tropical cyclones are, and that's going to be covered in this slideshow. All right, weather at the equator is basically hot and humid. Okay, humid means that there's a lot of moisture in the air. The reason why weather at the equator is hot and humid is because the equator has an energy surplus, meaning that radiation energy coming, radiant energy coming in from the sun hits the equator, and it's very concentrated because the sun, if you're at the equator, the sun is always pretty high in the sky, so it's beating straight down on you. Whereas at the poles, the same incoming solar radiation is spread over a larger area because it's hitting the Earth at an angle. And that just simply is a consequence of the Earth being round. So up here near the poles, you have the same amount of radiation being spread over a small area, spread over a large area, and spread over a very small area here at the equator. So, equator, hot and humid, because you are absorbing basically more heat than you are re-radiating back into space. At the poles, that's just the opposite. You're losing more radiation out into space than you're getting from the sun. So basically, tropical cyclones are one way of trying to take the excess heat from the equator and redistribute it and move it towards the poles. Okay? Your wind patterns and your ocean currents are also two other things that attempt to do that. All right? So, remember, weather, hot and humid at the equator. Here we go. All right, let's talk about what the Intertropical Convergence Zone is. It is kind of a mouthful, so a lot of times we just call it the ITCZ, but it's that band of clouds and showers that encircles the globe near the equator. When we watched the global view time lapse of what the clouds were doing on the Earth, we noticed that pretty much all the time there was a band of clouds near the equator that marched from east to west, and that is because there are trade winds converging from the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and there's a lot of warm, moist air rising to form clouds, and you see those clouds always drifting from east to west. Okay? And that is along the Intertropical Convergence Zone, which is basically the equator. Okay? All right, trade winds are easterlies, remember, because they generally blow from the east toward the west. Storm systems that form near the equator, including tropical cyclones, will move generally westward, meaning they will move from east to west as long as they remain close to the equator. And hopefully we have seen this with some of the tropical systems that we've been watching on the National Hurricane Center site. They generally drift off of the west coast of Africa and go out into the Atlantic and continue to move westward. All right, tropical cyclones, here's your definition. It is a warm core, low pressure system without any front attached to it that develops over tropical waters and has organized circulation. So let's break that down. A warm core, low pressure system without any front. So for instance, these tropical cyclones aren't associated with like a cold front or a warm front or any other boundary line between different air masses. Y'all have experienced, particularly in the fall, when we get cold fronts coming in, a lot of times thunderstorms and stuff come in with them along that frontal boundary. Tropical cyclones aren't associated with any sort of front, okay? They develop over tropical waters. Tropical waters are going to be waters that are warm near the equator. And tropical cyclones have organized circulation, okay? We have been looking at the National Hurricane Center site, and we have noticed a lot of little yellow or orange or red X's, and those mark tropical disturbances. Tropical disturbances are not considered tropical cyclones, primarily because they haven't gotten organized enough and they don't display circulation yet. Now, a lot of times those areas that we watch eventually do become tropical cyclones, and that's why we're watching them. Okay, but if it's just a tropical disturbance that's being marked, it's not yet a tropical cyclone, and it might or might not become one, okay, depending on conditions. Now, speaking of conditions, the biggest and most important factor for the formation of tropical cyclones is warm ocean water that is at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So this will help you understand why hurricanes do not form, why any sort of tropical cyclone, they don't form all year round. Okay? We tend to watch what happens out in the Atlantic and in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. But again, that ocean water is going to be nice and warm in summer to late summer, which is where we are right now in August. Okay? We've got to have warm ocean water so that tropical cyclones can form. They're not going to form if the water is not warm enough. All right, and then again, tropical cyclones can be tropical depressions, tropical storms, or hurricanes. All three are considered tropical cyclones because they all meet the definition. A warm core low pressure system without any front that develops over tropical waters and has organized circulation. Okay? You know, I'm thinking of like Goldilocks, Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear. Tropical depressions would be like the baby bear, right? The smallest, you know, least intense variety of tropical cyclones. Mama Bear might be tropical storms, Papa Bear might be hurricanes. And hurricanes can get very, very, very intense. Hurricanes are sometimes called typhoons or cyclones in other parts of the world. In our part of the world, we call hurricanes hurricanes. Okay? Where do tropical cyclones form? Well, they always form near the equator, but interestingly enough, they don't tend to form at the equator. And we're not going to get into that. If you are highly curious about that, you and I can have a private discussion. But they form near the equator, and because of how winds move along the equator, they tend to always drift west. Now, a lot of times they'll curve and move off a little bit, but they tend to generally go from east to west. This green area is the area that we tend to pay the most attention to because it has the potential to impact this part of the United States, the Gulf Coast and the eastern seaboard. Okay? All right, we do have other areas, like this is China, okay, Vietnam, Korea, that area, Philippines. They can be impacted by tropical cyclones that form out in the Pacific and drift west. Typically, if you have tropical cyclones forming in the eastern Pacific, which is where this is, a lot of times they just simply drift further out into the Pacific, and they're probably not going to make the news unless they happen to hit like Hawaii or some other island or something like that. But the ones we really watch are in here. All right, the progression of a tropical cyclone. Again, a lot of times what we see is we see a disturbance coming off the coast of Africa, coming out into the Atlantic Ocean, drifting west, and if the conditions are right, you can get a tropical depression. If it strengthens, then you can get a tropical storm. If it continues to strengthen, you can get a hurricane. Okay? Sometimes they don't get organized enough until they are in this area, but again, they can get better organized and they tend to generally drift westward. All right? Okay, we're going to pick up with this slide on the next video.